Hi everyone, and happy Wednesday! This week I'm working on a watercolor painting using watercolor ground to create some texture. I'm mostly going to be working with watercolors, and I have to say my process was quite a bit of a journey in trust. I find that the creative journey is a bit like a trust fall. I don't know if you've ever done this exercise in a group setting where you basically are with other people and you are asked to stand in the middle of a circle, close your eyes, and let yourself fall backwards, trusting that someone is going to catch you. It's a bit of a scary feeling because you really have to trust that someone else has your back, literally, and that they're not going to just let you fall to the ground. And so for me, the creative journey is a trust fall in the sense that every single time I choose to create, I am doing a trust fall with myself. I am choosing to trust that I'm going to have the ability to get through my process, to create something, whether it be beautiful or that if it's not beautiful, and who defines what beautiful is really? I think we all do that for ourselves. Um, that we're going to learn something if we don't at the end of the process, if we don't end up liking what it is we've created, that we will have learned something. So it's a journey in trusting in my ability first and foremost to learn and to go forward bravely, experimenting and trying different things so that I can learn what it is I love and what I don't really care for. Because in every single step of that process, I learned to develop my own personal style of creating. So I want to invite you to join me on this trust journey, and I hope you will give yourself a chance to play and experiment and try new things. If you feel like it's important for you to just develop your skills by trying to do exactly what it is I'm doing, that is completely fine. You're going to learn a ton that way too. But I would also like to encourage you to veer off the path I'm taking so you can see what pleases you. Because at the end of the day, what will matter most to you in your creative journey is that you express your own voice. So this week's painting is an abstract. I will say that it started off going in one direction and then it veered off into another direction because as I was going along, I discovered that what I was doing was just not speaking to me in the way I wanted it to speak to me. And so I shifted things, and then I ended up creating something that I liked far better. So grab your paint supplies, your watercolor ground, your watercolors, whatever it is you feel like creating with today, and let's get painting.
I started my process this week by taping my paper to a clipboard because I'll be able to move it. And then I walked up to my desk and I started sort of looking around me to see what it was I could use to help me create this week's painting. I don't have a plan. That's not unusual for me. I kind of just let the process sort of guide me in the direction I want to go every step of the way. Every little decision I make makes the next decision come about. So that's how I started. So I was looking around my desk. I saw these different bottle caps, and I decided that if I was going to create something with watercolor ground, I was going to use the bottle caps to create a series of circles using the watercolor ground to create texture. And that's how the process started. It was as simple as that. I like to just go with the flow and let things sort of emerge as I'm going along. And so I had this kind of general idea that as I was going to be stamping these circles onto my paper, that I would create a band of circles at the top. And then I wasn't so sure what I was going to create on the bottom, but I knew it'd be something that I would do with the watercolor ground as well. I applied the watercolor ground I'm using for the background in my painting to another piece of watercolor paper. And the reason I did this is that once I'm done using the watercolor ground that I have on that piece of paper, I can then create some textures on that piece of paper and then use them as collage for another painting. So this is a way for me to make sure that I'm making the most of my supplies. For the next part of my process, I've decided that I want to use this stencil to create some more texture on the bottom part of my painting. But before I did that, I made sure that the circles I had just stamped onto the paper were completely dry. Otherwise, they might have spread when I started to use the stencil, and I didn't really want that to happen. So I'm going to use this stencil, my palette knife, and some more watercolor ground, and I'm just gonna spread a little bit of the watercolor ground here and there in the piece of paper. I don't want to completely use all of the stencil because I want it to be sort of looking like there's a bit of a trickling down effect, that maybe some of my circles are raining down on the bottom portion of my paper. Hope that makes sense. After adding this last bit of texture using the stencil, I looked up at my circles and I felt like they looked a little too flat. And so I decided to make some of the circles stand out a little bit more by adding some more watercolor ground to cover the surface of some of these circles. And I think it'll help later on when I'm adding my watercolor to create more dimension in the painting. I'm feeling happier with what I've created in my background now, so I'm going to let everything dry completely and then I'll move on to starting to add my watercolor. Sometimes when you create something you really like in the background of your painting, it can be a little bit daunting to keep the process going, because what if you end up ruining what you've created and you end up not liking what you are doing moving forward. I have that feeling in almost every single one of my painting processes. And the only way to get through that feeling is exactly that, to get through it by pushing through. So I had no idea where to start. I liked what I had created on my paper using my watercolor ground but then I didn't really know what colors to start with. So, in order to just push myself through that fear, I decided to go with a neutral color, something that would just sort of help me make those textures pop a little bit more so that as I was going along, some other ideas would come to me intuitively. And that is what's happening. I'm applying this paint, I'm seeing my textures come out more prominently on the paper now that there's a little bit of color on the background. And I'm starting to feel a little bit more confident about what it is I want to do. But that doesn't mean I know every decision that I'm going to make all through the process. At this point, I only know what I want to try to do next. And I'm going to trust that as I go along, I will know what the best decision for me to make is later on. As I was adding the Titan buff to my paper and letting the textures come through more, I knew I wanted to make the band of circles at the upper part of the painting stand out more. So in order to do that, I wanted to add some more color. I really love working with yellows, but yellows can be a little bit overpowering at times. So I thought I'd start with a color that's a little bit more neutral on that's still in the yellow spectrum, so raw sienna. And I am just going to add a band of it. And once I'm done doing that, I'm just going to let everything dry before moving on to the next step. Because I'd added the raw sienna to my paper while the Titan buff was still wet, it spread my raw sienna, and I really must say I love that this happened. And so now what I want to do is try to create a bit of contrast using some neutral tint, and I'm going to put bands of that color on both the bottom and the top of the painting, and I'll spread it using some water. I want to keep the band of raw sienna relatively intact, but I'm not going to be too overly concerned if some of it drifts, if some of this neutral tint drifts down into the raw sienna, because I'm still very much in the beginning process of my painting, and I want to give myself the freedom to experiment, to let the water do what it feels like doing on my paper. And again, I'm just going to trust that in the end, every single thing that's happening right now is going to add to the final result of the painting. Every week I show up to create a new painting for my YouTube channel. I am taking a huge risk because I don't come in with a plan. I am really choosing to trust that I am gonna come up with something new and original that I'm gonna like, and that maybe my viewers will also enjoy. At the end of the day, though, the most important thing is that I like what I have created. And I say this because art is a very subjective thing, and in the art world, there are many critics. I say in some ways it probably is easier to be an art critic than to be an artist, because when you are an artist, you are putting yourself out there, you're putting your creativity out there, you're putting your ideas out there, and then the world gets to sort of decide what they think about it. So if I were to go into this process always worrying about what other people were going to think about what I've created, it would be very, very daunting for me to create. In fact, it might be the thing that would deter me from creating. And so I go in and I choose to put something out there that I like. And if other people like it, that's great. And if other people don't like it, that's okay too. Because at the end of the day, what matters the most is that I like what I've created and put out there. And it's a funny thing because we live in a world where, social media is all about the likes and the views and, what people think about what it is you're doing. And it can be very stressful. to have to think about these things. And so I do my best not to get too concerned with what other people have to say. It matters to me what that you're here, and it matters to me that you're enjoying my channel, but what matters most to me is that you, by watching my channel, are feeling inspired to create, and that you are putting yourself out there, that you're starting to experiment, that you're playing with your creative supplies, and that you're bringing some wellness into your life by creating, because the creative process is such a therapeutic process. It's probably one of the most mindful things I do on a day-to-day basis. When I'm creating, I am really so focused on what it is I'm doing in front of me that I don't have time to worry about other things. And that momentary distraction from the other things that are happening in the world that may or may not be upsetting to me, having a break from that is so good for my health. And I think it's good for your health too. And so if I on this channel can encourage you to create and to use creativity to bring wellness into your life, then that to me is success. And whether or not I love what I've created in the end, and I would say on most occasions, it ends up that I do like what I created. What matters most to me is that I'm having fun, that you're having fun, and that we are doing things that are good self-care. I really like the neutral tint and the raw sienna and Titan buff in my background, and the fact and the effects that were created by the salt were also really cool. But I thought that once everything dried, the area of the painting where my circles were sort of like pushed back, and I wanted them to be more of a focal point. So I've decided to add some more raw sienna into my circles. And I was saying earlier that yellow can be a bit of an overpowering color. And as I'm adding this, I'm I'm liking it, but I'm not 100% convinced at this point that this is absolutely the way for me to go with this. But I started it, so I'm gonna keep doing it and see if I feel better about it as I go along. But my intuition is usually not too wrong about things. And since my intuition is already telling me that I need to shift things, there's a good chance that's what's going to happen, but we'll see. The yellow was not, well, I guess the raw sienna was not really making my circles stand out as much as I wanted them to stand out. And so I decided to add some quinacridone burnt orange to the border in order to try and make them stand out more. But what I realized as I was adding the orange, remember how I was saying it was kind of feeling like the orange, the yellow, I mean, was maybe a little bit more overpowering. Well, of course, the orange, being that there is yellow in it, was just adding to that feeling. And so I started adding the orange, and I liked the orange sort of on its own, but right next to the yellow, it was just not speaking to me in the way that I wanted it to speak to me. And so now the yellow really seems like too much. I'm liking the quinacridone burnt orange. I want to keep that part, but I don't think I want to keep the yellow anymore. Then I kind of had a brief moment of wondering if I added some raw sienna a little bit more in the painting, on the bottom of the painting, if it would help to balance things out better, and if I would start to feel better about the raw sienna band at the top part of my painting. And I do actually like adding this raw sienna here on the bottom, but it's not making me feel better about the band of yellow circles or raw sienna circles at the top. So again, as I'm going along, my intuition is just speaking to me more and more loudly. And so I know at this point that I need to do something to switch up that band of yellow circles. And I have an idea how I'll do that. And I'll share that with you very shortly. So I pulled out my good old friend gesso and I put a little bit of water in my mix, and I've decided that I'm going to go over all this area of the circles with the gesso. The gesso, being that it's watered down, is not going to completely cover the yellow, but it will reduce its very vibrant its vibrancy, and it's going to tone it down quite a bit. So I think that's going to help things along. And as I'm doing this, I'm also thinking of other ways that I can make this area look better. And so I'm just gonna keep adding the gesso and see if any other ideas come to mind. But right now, I'm thinking that it might be nice to start shifting things a little bit to some more vibrant colors. But I also want to use maybe some blues, something to contrast this orange, and something that will look a lot more interesting than the yellow. I think the yellow was too much, and I'm glad that I'm doing away with it right now. It's still going to show a tiny bit in those circles, but I think once I'm done doing what it is I want to do, or that I think intuitively that I would like to do, I think it's going to look a lot better. And even now, just adding this white gesso over top the circles, I feel like I'm starting to like this better because it's really toning down that yellow. It was just too much. It was kind of like in your face, in my face. And I was not really digging it. So, when your intuition kicks in and says, whoa, pay attention, because that's your own creative voice telling you what your preferences are. And for me, there was definitely a preference to do away with that yellow, and I'm glad I am doing it. After contemplating my color palette and trying to decide between my intense blue and my cobalt teal light, I decided to go with the cobalt teal light. And I'm happy I did, because it really looks nice against the orange. And I want to make sure I'm going to keep some of that yellow that's in my painting. I'm also going to keep some of that orange, but adding this blue is a nice contrast, and I think it's going to be exactly what I need to start shifting this painting into a different direction. And it really felt like it started off well. And then at one point it started to feel wrong. And when it starts to feel wrong, ask yourself, how can I switch things up so that I like it better? And that's what I did here. And for me, going in the direction of adding this blue is definitely the right decision for me. It feels like the colors are looking better to me now. I've still got a long ways to go in my process, but I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing, and I would have not gotten to this point had I not dared to cover what it is I had started to create. So it's important to do that. You know, if your gut tells you it's time to veer into a different direction, listen to your gut, try something different, and don't give up. It's you know, it's so tempting to give up when you get to that point where you're like, "Ooh, what am I doing? Why did I make that decision?" You know, the yellow was beautiful at first and then it became not so beautiful. So I'm glad my intuition kicked in and talked to me. So I really, really love this cobalt teal light. I think it's definitely the right direction to go. So now I'm going to start deepening that color. I'm going to add a little bit more pigment on the paper because I want that color to stand out more. And yeah, I think this is the right shift. I think this is definitely the right shift. But it's not over yet. So I'm just going to keep at it and I'm going to keep listening to what my intuition guides me to do next. I'm definitely liking that blue better in my circles, and they are seeming to stand out a little bit more, though I know I want to do other things to that area. I think I need to also start adding some blue in the bottom of my painting because with all that blue in my circles at the top of the painting and nowhere else, it seems like there's something missing and there's no balance in the painting. And so I want to add some blue in the bottom of the painting. And instead of using the exact same blue, I'm going with turquoise because this is a color very similar to the cobalt teal light that I was using, but it's more transparent and I want it to sort of blend and let me still be able to see what's underneath the color. And so it's for me a better choice to go with a transparent color like this turquoise. I'm also using a lot of water because I want to keep it as transparent as possible. And as I'm adding it here, I'm also looking at the top and I'm thinking I want to add it on the top as well. And this is again just to help create more balance in the painting. Otherwise, everything would look kind of disjointed if I didn't add this blue. So adding it here and then adding it on top, I think is just the perfect thing to do. My intuition is kicking in again, and this time it's with a resounding yes. I love what I have decided to do with this turquoise and with the teal, and I feel like it's starting to head in the right direction for me. So it's kind of got that ethereal kind of feeling, like almost like foggy, colorful fog or something happening in the top and in the bottom. And I love how the water is really helping me to make that color, that transparent turquoise, blend into the rest of the painting. It still has some pops of yellow, which I really love, but the yellow is now not overwhelming, and I'm feeling way better with this direction. The yellow is starting to fade a little bit too much into the background, however, and I know once everything dries, it's going to be even lighter. So I've decided to add a little bit of nickel azo yellow just to brighten things up again. And I know ultimately that all of this yellow won't be shining through, but I still want to make sure some of it is there. And so by adding a little bit of nickel azo yellow to the background right now, I know I'll be able to preserve some of that yellow brightness that I like. And again, I'm doing it using a lot of water because I want the color to remain transparent and I want it to blend with what's there already. And so I'm not going in with pure pigment because that would probably be overwhelming again, and I just walked away from that. So I don't want to get back into that same situation, but helping it blend into the background of the painting is exactly what I think this painting needs. I love when the colors blend together, and now I'm thinking I know what my next step is going to be. So I'm liking the colors in my painting better now. And at the same time, my focal point is sort of still pretty bland. It's not standing out as much as I'd like it to. And the best way I know to make that happen is to add some contrast. And so I'm going to come in with a bit of that turquoise that I used in the bottom and top portions of my painting. And I'm going to add some watery turquoise over the surface of my circles. And because there's texture in this area, the texture will tend to pool in the lower areas of the textures. And so the raised areas are going to keep looking like they're a lighter color. And then in all of the dips in my textures, the turquoise is going to end up sitting. And so I think that's going to create the contrast I want to make my circles stand out. In fact, I think the best thing to do would be for me to come in like I'm doing right now and to just add drops of more pigmented paint in the areas that have the goodness, I can't even think of the word, but there's raised edges and it's like it's at the tip of my tongue. Anyway, I don't know what the word is, but basically in between the textures, I want to add some dark values so that it can make my circles start to stand out. I hope you're understanding what it is I'm trying to say. And if I'm not able to say it with words, I hope my paintbrush can translate it correctly. So there's more contrast at this point, but not as much as I'd like it to have. So I'm gonna come in with dark blue that I really love. It's from a different palette than the palette I was using. This is my Decadent Pies watercolor palette by Prima Watercolors. And I love this blackberry blue so much. It's one of my favorite dark colors of blue, and I think it's going to help me add a little bit more contrast to my circles so that they can stand out a lot more. Mission accomplished. My circles are definitely standing out a whole lot more now. Um, but I want to, again, add some more contrast so that they can stand out even more. And I think it's going to be kind of fun to add a color that hasn't really shown up yet in the painting. So I'm working with quinacridone rose, or yeah, quinacridone rose, and I like doing that, adding a little bit of a pop of color that's a little bit unexpected. And I think this color also plays really well with the cobalt teal and the other colors that are in my painting so far. Now, it's nice to add a little pop of color like this because it does add some interest to the painting. In order to keep things balanced, though, it's going to be important for me to make sure I add it in other locations as well. When I was adding the blackberry to my painting, I was looking at another color from my Prima Watercolors Decadent Pie set that I really love, and it's called Apple. And it's very similar to the quinacridone burnt orange, but a little bit more opaque, although I'm applying it here with quite a bit of water, so it doesn't look very opaque. But I think this color will also add another element of interest to the painting, and so I've decided to add it. I probably could have done just as well with my quinacridone burnt orange, but I wanted to try it, so there you go. Like I said, experiment and play, and if you feel called to do something, do it. And since I was feeling called to doing that, I just went ahead and did it, and I am not regretting that decision. I think it actually looks quite nice. At this point, I'm feeling satisfied with what I've created in the background of my painting, and I want to start focusing on the area of my painting that is my focal point, and I want to make these circles stand out more. And so I've decided to use some tropical sunrise magic green, what I just typically call magic green for short because what is up with these long names? Anyway, one of my very favorite colors from Kramer Pigments, and I think it's going to add a little bit of light value contrast, and it's also going to add contrast in terms of shimmer that will go really well against all the other matte colors in the background of the painting. Another color I know will be absolutely beautiful in this painting is Star Gold. And so I'm going to come in with my micro mini brush. I've loaded it with pigment, with Star Gold pigment, and I am using the brush sort of on its side, flatly brushing against the surface, the raised surfaces of the textures that I've created. And this is just going to add some color to those raised edges of the textures. And I think it's going to make those circles stand out even more. And in the end, it's going to make my focal point, that little band of circles, also stand out. So what I do here by adding some gold to those circles, I'm also going to want to draw out into the bottom of the painting as well, just to keep things a little bit more balanced. But I think after I'm done doing this, I'll be ready to call this painting complete. Removing the tape from my paper is often when I know for sure whether or not my painting is finished. And so I've decided to go ahead and do that and see how I feel once the tape is removed, and then I'll decide whether or not I want to add anything else. But as I'm pulling off this tape, I can already tell that the painting is exactly what I wanted it to be. I didn't know this is what I wanted it to be when I first started off, but as I was working on it, it was kind of taking its own direction and taking me in different directions. And I am really happy with the decisions I made along the way because I am loving this little painting. Texture. You really make my heart sing. I just love it. I love working with texture so much, and it really, since I discovered using watercolor ground in this way, I feel like my watercolor paintings and my watercolor journey and experience have just sort of taken a step in the right direction. Whether you were painting with me or watching me paint, I hope you enjoyed the journey as well. Thank you again for making the time to join me this week. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. And most importantly, happy creating, sweet friends.